the end of the day, who bears the responsibility for those damaged vehicles, and who bears the responsibility for the personal injuries and the pain and the suffering of the people who were put in the ambulance about the time you were getting to the scene after the sheriff called you, and about the time, you know, the local television station got there with their crew. And as you deal with that issue, as you look forward, there's going to be some things that, going back before you ever got the call from the sheriff, obviously, that you can do, that you can think about today, that will hopefully help your situation from a risk management standpoint, that will put you in the best possible position that you can be in if you get that call. In addition to that, there's some things you can do as soon as you get out of your truck on the south end of the place where you find these cars that can affect your position as you go forward in court. And let's look at what some of those are. And I want to just tell you on this opening one, many of you know that barbed wire's been around since the 19th century. A fellow named Joseph Glidden got the patent in 1874. And when it hit the scene, our Native American brothers and sisters called it the devil's rope. So I'm going to give you some suggestions on how you can reduce your risk of being caught in the devil's rope. Because usually it's a failed fence somewhere that's going to let those cattle be in the road in the first place. Point number one, and I had to put this first, you know I did, I'm a trial lawyer. Buy plenty of insurance before you let the first animal off the trailer, and more about this below. Now, how much? I don't know. As much as you can buy. As much as you can buy. The reason is, it really doesn't matter what your rate of gain is. It doesn't matter what numbers you're running, how cheap you buy them, how expensive you sell them, how good of a vet you are. Because you can do all that perfectly, and you can have one bad court experience without any insurance, and it's not going to be yours anymore. And that's a hard thing to say. That's a hard set of words to have to hear, but that's the truth. Because the folks that handle these serious injury cases, believe me, they're like the animals we get in at our farm. They've had their shots and they're ready to go. And they're not going to care in the end if you lose your farm or if you keep your farm. Point number two, know the fencing law in your state and your county. And remember, and we're going to get into a couple of states' fencing laws, but remember that just because you know your state's fencing law, your county may have some additional regulations on that, particularly if you live near a large metropolitan area. The state does not prohibit the county from enacting some specific, sometimes more restrictive regulations. But you've got to know wherever your fence is, you've got to know what a legal fence is right there, because that's not where the inquiry is going to end in court, but that's where it's going to begin. And if your fence doesn't even meet the bare legal minimum, you're in trouble. You're in trouble before you start. There's more trouble to come, but you've got to have a legal fence. Remember that, as I said, fencing law defines the minimum fence that's legal for perimeter fencing, and you have whatever kind of cross fences you want, of course. But the nature of your operation may require fencing that exceeds the minimum definition of a legal fence. Now, we all know if you get a load of these stocker calves in and then just pulled off their mama night before last and put on the truck, they're gonna run the fence, they're gonna bawl, and they're gonna be looking for a way out. I think when you see the definition of a legal fence in Tennessee or the legal definition in Kentucky, you're gonna say, I've had lots of calves that fence wouldn't hold. Had lots of calves. And to make matters worse, if you're like me, if you're a cow-calf guy, you've got bulls that probably can't be confined under certain circumstances. You lock a bunch of heifers up, and these fences that I'm going to show you the requirements on, not going to keep that bull away from some cycling heifers. So keep in mind that just because you've got a legal fence, your fencing decisions may still get tested in court one day if it comes out the nature of your operation is such that you've got animals in there that are that are determined to get out. Now, before I leave that top point, let me also mention, we all have neighbors, and some of us have neighbors who raise livestock, and if you're the one, running the stocker operation with the heifers, your fence may keep them in, but it may not keep the guy's bull down the road out. And if he breaks that fence and your heifers get out, I'm not here to tell you that you're going to be held liable for that. I'm not saying that, but I'm not saying what will happen. I'm just saying, you've got an issue there. So maybe something that you have to work out with your neighbor, but just keep in mind that there's a lot of considerations on these fences. Before you ever get the call from the sheriff, and this is, if other than the buying of the insurance, if I had to ask you to really highlight one of these points and take it home with you and use it, I hope you'll do that with this bottom point. Have a sound plan for inspecting and maintaining your fences, and stick to your plan. If you have to go to court in a fence case, your plan and your actual practices in following the plan will most likely be an issue. I think I could have just said it will be an issue. Some people ask me, not just in livestock cases, but just in general, should I write this plan down? And if I do, should I keep a diary? And, that's a decision that you have to make. I can't tell you that you should do that or you shouldn't. Personally, I don't need that written down. And if I'm going to defend you, it's fine if you've written it down. But if you've written it down, my prayer for you is going to be that you followed it. Because the worst thing you can wind up with in court, defense case or otherwise, is a plan that is written down that wasn't followed. Because you've just set the standard for yourself when you put pen to paper. And if you didn't follow it, if you said, look, I'm going to have this plan where we're going to check the fences, once a week or 2 times a week or whatever you're going to check them, and then you don't, because a slick planer slugger shows up with a picture of a tree that's been on a fence for a very, very long time. Maybe the camera had a date on it, I don't know. And you're up there with a plan that says you're going to be checking it every 2 or 3 days. You've hurt yourself by doing that. Have a sound plan for escaping cattle. This takes you back to the scene after the sheriff called you. Make this plan before that night. Make this plan today. This will vary depending on the nature of your operation, but it could include the following considerations. All right, we talked about insurance. Now, when you buy your insurance, please don't take somebody's word for what your insurance covers. You will get a policy. Typically after you give the company the check, the policy will come in the mail weeks later. Read that policy. Understand that policy. If you don't have the time, the inclination, or the skill to read it, pay a lawyer to read that policy and give him a scenario like I gave you with the sheriff and ask him, will this policy protect me in that situation? Because I'm going to tell you, if you assume that it will, or maybe your agent when you was buying it, maybe he didn't mean to have a misunderstanding with you, maybe he thought he was answering a different question and you thought you were covered. And then you have the loss. The court is not going to be particularly concerned with the conversation that you had with the agent, what you said to him or what he said back. The court is going to be concerned with what is written in that policy of insurance. And if it doesn't provide you any coverage, then you're on your own there. You're paddling your own canoe in that case. So you have to make sure. Now, also, when you buy amounts of coverage, keep in mind that, $200,000 worth of coverage, which is not very much, doesn't cost twice as much as $100,000. The higher, I know many of you know this, but the higher you go, each increment, it costs less. So think about that. Think about an umbrella policy that will sit above all your other coverages. It'll sit above your automobile policy. It'll sit above your farm owner's policy. Think about that, because when you get into some of these catastrophic injuries like in these vehicles that we looked at, it just doesn't take long, we all know, to get into medical bills that can be $100,000, $200,000 or more, along with pain and suffering that goes on top of that. And I know many of you, most of you, have farms, you have equity in those farms, and once the insurance is gone, if there's still injuries and pain and suffering to be compensated, it's the equity in your farm that they're going to be looking at. Now, we're going to get to it in a minute. It doesn't mean just because it was your cow that you're at fault and you're going to write the check, okay? We're going to get to that, but you got to plan for the worst case scenario. If possible, and I think it is possible, but know who your neighbors are. Know them personally. I know this sounds like common sense, a lot of this is, but make sure that they know how to get in touch with you and how to reach you. I realize that is really the last call that you want when you're leaving for vacation or when you're at your grandkids' softball game. But the worst thing that can happen, I'll assure you, in one of these cases, is for witnesses to come into court and testify. You know, we tried for hours to find him, and nobody seemed to be able to find him. And doesn't mean you're going to get beat, but you got to remember you're going to be judged in Tennessee by 12 people who may have never gotten any closer to a cow than having gone to McDonald's. You know, they're not going to know anything about what we face and maybe the good deeds that we've done or how hard we tried to keep that fence up. They're not going to do that. They're going to be looking at this catastrophically injured plaintiff, and they're going to be looking at a slick presentation of some damaged fence, and it's easy to be swayed by that. So know who they are. Make sure they know how to get in touch with you, because it's going to help you if you get that call from the neighbor, you take that call, and then you take it seriously. You drop what you're doing, and you personally go see about this problem. You know, maybe you've got help that you're going to have meet you out there, but you need to be seen dealing with this problem if the matter goes to court. When an incident arises, make sure that it is your animal. I know that sounds basic, but a lot of us that have cattle, you know, a lot of times it's just assumed when one's out that it's ours. I know we've all gotten calls before, and you get over there and it's not even your cow at all. But make sure you either brand them or that you have some distinctive ear tags or other permanent markings on them so that you can know when you get there if they're even your cattle. And we're going to get to statements in a minute, but don't just get out of the truck claiming them, or don't get out of the truck disclaiming them, okay? A lot of times you can just listen, you know, or you can try to help somebody that needs help without saying things that you're going to hear later and maybe wish that you either hadn't said or you said differently. But know this, if you think it's a good thing not to tag your cattle, and I know everybody here is conscientious and you probably do tag your cattle, but if there's some uncertainty about the ownership of those cattle and you've got a fracture in your fence that is nearby, at the end of the day, they may not even be your cattle, but there's a good chance that the jury's going to find that they were your cattle. And it doesn't just work to say, well, I don't tag mine, but, you know, I had, 8 baldies, and, one of them had a black stripe down her face, and this, that, and the other, and, this one here had this one that got hit had a different stripe configuration. That's a jury question, okay? And again, that's for the 12 people who may have never set foot on the farm anywhere, anytime. Because somebody's hurt and they're going to want to help them. If possible, be personally involved in dealing with the incident with appropriate attention, first being given to anyone who's been injured, and then turn your attention to catching the escaped cattle and addressing the fencing problems that led to the escape. I mean, again, that's common sense, but there's another reason I tell you this. The people who are out there watching need to see you dealing with your business. They need to see your concern. I know you're concerned. You're concerned or you wouldn't be here. You're concerned or you wouldn't have answered the sheriff's call. But the people who are watching need to see you concerned. Okay? You don't have to accept responsibility for doing that. I mean, you don't have to have a discussion of whether this was the second time she got out or the first or the 10th. You don't have to say, we nicknamed her Houdini because the fence won't hold her. You don't have to do that. That'll come later. But let people see you care, and don't be afraid to care. I know a lot of people think, I'm paralyzed in this situation because I don't know what to do. Well, make it part of your plan where you do know what to do, and you're never going to be faulted for helping somebody. okay? Because I've seen juries forgive a lot of egregious conduct because the person who was at fault was in there trying to do something about it. Now, is that legally maybe what the jury should have done? No, but juries depart from the law and the facts every day, and that's why you need to try to stay out from in front of one of them if you can. Make sure you have the supplies, tools, and labor resources ready to address both the escaping livestock and the fence problem in an emergency under the worst conditions you can imagine, because that's when this is going to happen. Don't let the sheriff's call catch you without a roll of barbed wire, without your fence stretchers, without your tools. It's like a lot of you aren't cow-calf operators, but I tell people it's like your calf pulling supplies, You may use them once every 3 or 4 years, but have them where you can get to them, because as sure as they're scattered out or you can't find them, that's the night you're going to need them. And you're going to have to be ready to get those things in a moment's notice. Now, this could include things like corral panels. Have your stuff ready and know what you're going to do when this comes up. Now, I put it in a parenthetical at the bottom. Some of you may laugh, but I think it's a good idea to know somebody, maybe your vet, maybe you have one, know somebody who's got a tranquilizer gun. Because when you're in the interstate and she's standing out there in the median and she's going to bolt, that's the time to use it before she runs across that other lane of traffic after you begged the highway patrol to close the interstate down and they wouldn't do it. Know some cowboys who can rope. Now, you may not get to rope them that night, but a lot of the universities have these rodeo teams and things like that, and we have actually had to use some of them before. Those guys are good, and they can catch wild cattle. Now, what you do with them when you get them on the trailer is your call. I take them to the sale barn, but that's just me. But know some folks who can help you get them rounded up. All right. Going back to insurance, you don't have to do it that night, but as soon as it's practical, I would say next time their office is open, report the incident to them, okay? Don't breathe a sigh of relief and say, well, I think it's just a bent fender and I don't think anybody was hurt and this is just going to drive my premiums up. I don't think I'm going to tell them this time. Don't fall victim to that, okay? Because people have a long time to file a lawsuit. And if you don't tell your insurance company and that lawsuit comes in, your insurance company's going to say what? And they've got a right to say this. I don't blame them for saying this. They're going to say, we didn't have any notice of this. We didn't have any opportunity to come out and investigate it. You have compromised our position in this risk because you didn't tell us about it. So report it. It doesn't matter. You're better off reporting one. Now, if your cow got out and there wasn't an accident, I'm not saying call and tell them that, but if it made contact with a vehicle or if it damaged somebody's crops, you call them and tell them. Follow it up with some kind of a written document. Now, it can be an electronic document, an email that you save. It can be a letter you send them. It can be a fax. I don't really care what it is. But when you tell your agent on the phone, and he's a good guy, but things happen. The man dies or something, and the lawsuit comes in later, and somebody's a quadriplegic or something over this thing, and it's a very serious case. If that insurance company doesn't have a record that you reported it, then all of a sudden, not only do you have litigation with the people in the vehicle, you've got litigation with your insurance company over whether you told them. But if you just send them a simple email, and you put that in a saved file, this will confirm our telephone conversation that, a pickup truck hit one of my cars or hit one of my cows last night. Period. Call me if you need something. That's all you got to do. But be sure that you do it. Next one, if your fence was inadequate, even if it was a legal fence, do not allow the escape to be repeated because the legal consequences of the second incident will be worse. And I think that speaks for itself. And I'm not telling you get necessarily one free outbreak on one of these things, but if you catch the same animals, put them back in the same enclosure, and just hook the fence back together where they broke it, especially if they broke it. Now, if a tree fell on it, maybe that's different. But be really careful with that bottom point because you're going to be put on notice then that there was something about the enclosure and the animals that were behind it that were a bad match for one another. So you're going to need to either look at moving them, reinforcing it, or doing something, because when the lawyers get a hold of it and the spin is put on it, it's going to be put on it as you knew or should have known in the language of the law that that fencing arrangement with those animals wouldn't work. All right. Be careful what you say, and remember, you cannot win your case on the side of the highway. Nobody's ever won one out there. But you can be sure that you can lose it out there. And you may get out and you may say, oh gosh, I know him. He's had 4 lawsuits and it won't work, and he'd run from the job if you tried to chase him down and give it to him. You may feel that in your heart. That may be true. But don't let those words come out of your mouth, because you're going to hear them again. And, you know, it's going to make you look like a person that you don't want to look like in front of the jury. And the time to reconstruct and redo the lawsuit will come later. Remember, make sure that if anybody's hurt, that they're getting medical attention. Make sure that you're seeing getting your cattle caught and locked back up. And make sure that you're seeing tending to your fences, okay? Now, as part of that, make sure that as you do those things, that you find out everywhere that fence has a problem. I mean, it's easy to, it's common sense, but just because you think you found where they got out, if you've got some out, check the whole perimeter of that fence immediately. Because, you know, whether it was a storm that blew 1 tree down, maybe it blew 2 down, but again, you just can't be in a situation where you're back out there in a few hours with the same cows out, because it's going to be worse then. Now, let's look quickly at what's a legal fence in Tennessee, and that's found in our Tennessee Code under 44.8.103, horses, cattle, and mules sufficiently fenced. Basically, what is going to make a fence legal in Tennessee, we're talking about 5, now there's other, you can have wooden fences and things like that, okay? I'm not saying this is the only legal fence, but for those of us who use barbed wire, 5 strands tightly between posts. The posts can be no further apart than 20 feet. The topmost wire cannot be lower than 4.5 feet, and the bottom wire cannot be less than 6 inches from the ground, and the second wire from the bottom not less than 15 inches from the ground. That's your bare minimum legal fence in Tennessee. You know, and I said earlier, you know, those of you who wean calves, those of you who have a heifer separated from the bull, or cows that are cycling, you know, a lot of times, depending on the circumstances, that fence is not going to hold those animals. It's sure probably not going to hold those calves if they're wanting to get through it. But that's the minimum, and that's the measuring stick that your fence is going to be measured by. Kentucky, sorry it's smaller, but there's more to it up there. Kentucky takes a little bit different tack toward it. They call it a strong and sound fence, 4 feet high, so close that cattle cannot creep through, made of rails or plank or wire, and plank or wire or hedge or stone or brick. And same basic deal there. You know, that's a minimum fence. Now, I've looked at some cases in Tennessee and Kentucky. I will tell you that our fencing laws in both states are very different from one another, but they're very, very old laws. And we got to be careful as we navigate through this, because the courts take these old laws and they can take a statute like that and they can put sometimes a surprising interpretation on it in a set of facts. At the break or something, someone asked me about it. I can tell you about a Kentucky case that I read recently that has kind of a surprising result, but I won't go into all of that here. All right, there's our friend Mr. Glidden that we have to thank for the Devil's Row. Does anybody have any questions? Yes, sir.
What's the statute of limitations on a law claim?
The question is, what's the statute of limitations on a law claim? I can tell you in Tennessee, on a personal injury, it's 1 year for an adult. A child, their statute of limitations does not begin to run until their 18th birthday, and they have 1 year past that. So if there's a 1-year-old child in the vehicle that hits your cow, you've got 18 years to sweat that claim. In Kentucky, I'm not as sure, they have a little bit longer. I believe it's 2 years there, although my lawyer contacts in Kentucky tell me a loss of consortium claim in Kentucky has to be filed within 1 year. That's what a husband or spouse have when the other one's injured. If there's anybody in here who knows different, please let me know. But what I told you about Tennessee is right. Property damage in Tennessee, 3 years. Yes, sir.
You mentioned having enough insurance. You got guidelines on that?
Yeah, I really don't. The question is, how much insurance is enough? And, you know, you don't have to look very far in these kinds of cases to see damage awards from juries that are in the 7-figure range. You really don't. And a lot of times, you know, we see medical bills, $400,000 or $500,000 medical bills. And we see life care plans where young people are going to require around-the-clock care, you know, because of a catastrophic injury like this. And, you know, again, just because it was your cow doesn't mean you're going to be held responsible, but you've got to remember 12 people who have never touched a cow may decide that case. I think it's sort of up to everybody what they're going to do. I don't think, especially with some commercial stocker operations, I personally don't think $1 million is enough. Now I realize a guy that has cows on the side, you know, 10 or 15 mama cows, and you know, he works in town, his wife works in town. There's a limit to what you can buy, even though the same cow can do the same damage. But you might be surprised how inexpensive $1 million umbrella policy is. Check with your insurance agent. I mean, I don't sell stuff, but it does protect what you've worked hard to have. Yes, sir. As I understand it, the question is when you've got a landlord-tenant situation, and let's say the tenant in this situation is the cattle farmer, and we have a loss. Who's responsible? I can tell you who's going to get sued. They're both going to get sued, and the reason the landowner's going to get sued is because he's probably the one with the equity in the land. I mean, not that the tenant wouldn't have. Many tenants do have a lot of equity somewhere, but the guy that's got his name on the deed can get ready for that lawsuit. But the lease between the two should address that. A good lease should address not only who has the responsibility for things like maintaining fences, but equally importantly, who has responsibility for buying liability insurance. And typically, I mean, it's whatever parties agree to, but typically the landowner in that situation is going to expect the operator to buy that insurance and do what? And to provide him a copy with the policy and the declaration page so he'll know how much he bought. And, you know, just like we all, you know, you have a mortgage on your house, a copy of that goes to your mortgage holder because they want to make sure what? That you don't let the mortgage lapse on the house and the house burns down and then you can't pay for it. So it's a pretty common thing to be added as a copy recipient on that. Yes?
We are partners on stocker cattle, but on our mama cows, I'm 60% exports, and I've got insurance. Are we both covered?
You need to make sure that you're both named as insureds on the policy, because you know when you buy the policy, you know I know we all know this. There's an application, and while we're on applications, let me mention, be very careful, because the way the application usually works in my situation is. I'll restate the question was, he's a 60% owner and his partner's a 40% owner. He has the insurance, as I understand it, in his name, but he wonders, you know, does that provide coverage for his partner? And that prompted me to say that when you fill out your application for insurance, if your situation is like mine, my agent asks me questions and then he writes down answers that I give him, and when we get done, he spins the paper around and I sign it. That's how it works, and that's appropriate. That's how it works. But I encourage you, not because anybody's trying to trick anybody, but because people make mistakes. Please read that application before you sign it, because he genuinely might have misunderstood an answer to a question you gave him, and if that's later determined to be a material difference in the way an operation is run, you know, because there might have been a question on there: do you have any partners, or who's the one seeing to this? And, you know, if it turns out that it was his job to see to the fences, I'm not saying that coverage is ultimately going to be denied, but I am saying you can find yourself in litigation with your insurance company at the same time you're in litigation with somebody that's been hurt and looking for damages. Yes, sir.
What's your status on a handshake agreement or a written contract on leasing?
Oh, I think you got to have a written contract because of issues like this. You know, and I realize if it's your son or your father or your brother or somebody like that, a lot of times that's not how business gets done. But, you know, I look at that like co-signing on somebody's note. You know, can you put your head on the pillow at night, get a good night's sleep knowing they're going to go pay the banquet? And if you can, then sign it. If you can't, you know, you may not want to be in the arrangement to begin with, but that's what we're talking about. I mean, if it's a handshake, do you trust him to go down and buy the amount of insurance it's going to take to protect what you've worked your whole life to call your own? Yes, sir.
Cattle guards, that's what I was called, pipe entryway into a pasture. What's the status there?
In Kentucky, down here under D, and I know that's hard to read, that's my fault, but it says a cattle guard not less than 8 feet wide and not less than 6 feet across with a pit not less than 2 feet, 6 inches deep with iron pipes not less than 2, and it goes on. So
they are.
yeah, they're defined in Kentucky. Now Tennessee doesn't define them. Maybe our legislature thought our ground was so darn hilly that we couldn't get a cattle guard on it.
I'm out of Illinois, I'm on a mission project, picking up information. Next question, what role does history play in the scenario of the escaped cattle? I mean, you've been on the highway 20 years, not had an incident. What role does that play?
It plays a huge role because it goes into what I said of have a practice, a plan, and follow the plan. And if your neighbors and you and your community knows that you're a person that tends to these issues, I'm not saying the jury's going to get 100% the full picture of that, but by the time your case is tried, they're going to have a pretty good flavor for how you run your operation, and vice versa. And it may be that the incident the sheriff called you about, honest to goodness, the tree blew down that night and the cattle got out, and it would really be unfair due to an act of God to hold you responsible in negligence for something. But if you've got a reputation as somebody whose cows stay out as much as they stay in, you very well may lose that case. Anybody else? Yes.
Back to the insurance coverage of the partners.
Yes.
What about husband and wife?
Well, they're going to. I mean, typically, they're both going to be insureds on the policy because, in a lot of situations, the husband and wife own the real estate that is the subject of the policy. But I will say this: if you own that property together and you own the cattle together, and one of you tends to the fences and the other one tends to, the children, you've got it on the line too. I mean, it's your operation, even though, you thought he was fixing the fence when he was riding around with his buddies looking at crops. Yes. Sorry, I had to throw you under the bus.
You moved off.
I said crops.
This husband-wife deal, and then you have a partnership that includes a couple of sons. What about this insurance?
Okay. The question was, as I understand, what if a husband and a wife are involved in a partnership along with 2 of the couple's sons, and the business is operated that way? What has to happen there when that insurance is bought on the insurance side, there has to be full disclosure of what that arrangement is so that the insurance company can adequately assess its risk in issuing that policy. It will be, I think, taking a pretty unnecessary chance, obviously not to disclose the full nature of that business relationship to the insurance company, because they could later say, I thought husband was going to be checking the fences. I didn't know he was going to get you know, the son that doesn't spend a lot of time on the farm could be checking the fences. Is there a question back there? Or? As I understood the question, he and I are adjoining landowners. He has a tree and it falls on the fence. Now, you didn't say this, but I'm going to assume that the fence is a boundary between our property. I'm going to assume that that's a line fence. We share the responsibility for maintaining that fence. A lot of people don't like that. In Tennessee, a lot of people don't understand that. But somebody may say, look, well, I'm a row crop person. I don't like fences. Well, that's too bad. That's a line fence. The fence is on your side? Or the... Yeah, well, you can get into issues of fault. You know, what did you know and when did you know it? I mean, was the tree dead and leaning like that? Was it a green tree? Things like that. I'm not going to tell you that there's just absolute liability for that, but I will tell you that a lot of our insurance policies will cover that anyway. I mean, they'll cover the property damage if it damages somebody else's property. Your insurance would cover that. A lot of policies would. It depends on the language. Yes, that's the question I was waiting for. You did what I suggested you do. You went and you bought insurance. Then you have the claim, and you know maybe you had a good defense, but you had a bad jury, and they enter a judgment against you, be above and beyond the liability limits of your insurance. What happens? You owe the money. The judgment is against you. Now, pardon? Well, the insurance company will then, once the court proceedings are done, they will pay to the injured party all of your policy limits, and then the rest is on you.
But if they put it on you, how do they?
Well, you got to write a check. And if
You
that,
don't have the money.
well, if you get bankruptcy, I mean, you know, but now that you can't get right. I mean, that's the risk we speak of.
I'll let you follow up that, then we got to stop.
Is there an advantage to incorporating this operation?
The question is there an advantage to incorporating the operation? That is a hugely complicated question, but I will tell you this. Unless you're willing to put your land into the corporation as one of its assets, that may not be an advantage for you, because if you're gonna own the land and the fence, then somehow you've either got to lease that to the corporation. I mean, it's hard to own the land and keep it out of a lawsuit if it's the fence on the land that fails that lets the cows get into the I'm going to be here tonight and tomorrow, and I love talking about this stuff, so before Clyde shoots me, I'm going to give this to him.